All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode of the London is Blue podcast. We got another Matt Law special. Matt Law in the house. How is it going, sir?
Yeah, good. The sun has stopped shining here, unfortunately, but otherwise fine.
Yeah, it's getting dark a little too early. As we were eating dinner last night, my wife was quite upset that it was pitch black out already. So we're turning that corner here as well.
Good. It feels more like football season weather, though. That's what I will say.
Get the jumpers out, as you might say.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Well, we're coming off international break. Quite boring. How was that for you? It's pretty quiet. Did you follow England? Did you follow the Chelsea players, or did you just relax?
I followed England. I do England when it's international break. So I was in Poland and then Glasgow. So sadly, no relaxing for me. I thought one interesting thing, I've got to credit this stat to somebody else, but I can't remember who told it me. That's the problem. In the internationals, I think in the senior international teams, there wasn't a single Chelsea player who started for a European senior team in the international weekend. They obviously had some South American starters, but I mean, I couldn't even begin to try and go back over the records of when the last time that would have been. So I was staggered by that stat.
That would really add up to how things feel like they're going right now. So
sorry, I didn't mean that as a negative particularly. No. It just shows how the club's changed.
Oh, well, and just the current situation, because we would have had many internationals.
Exactly, injuries.
It's just, exactly. It is a tough time right now. So anyways, we can go ahead and kind of pivot into some of the things that are going on around the club, Matt, because even though there was nothing going on the pitch, there's plenty going on off of it, which is what keeps things exciting. But let's talk about on the pitch first. Chelsea drawing away to Bournemouth 0-0, right? Not able to kind of correct the results right before the international break, but I don't think the international break did Pochettino and the club any favors, right? Lavia picking up an injury at the training ground. Other players not coming back, Casado with a knock. I'm sure he was super frustrated as well. We're seeing 12 injuries, getting briefed at the media. How is Poch? Because I know you've covered Poch for a long time at Spurs and things like that. How do you think he is managing this situation? Because I think he was a little bit had a little bit of a bite to kind of like protect what he has going on at the end of the match, because there was some boos. I think they're more stray than collective. And I think he definitely tried to defend him in the squad, because he knows this isn't what really he has, right? Because of the injuries and whatnot.
Yeah, look, I was actually a bit surprised he bit back, because certainly in my experience with Pochettino, he's quite philosophical about injuries usually. I mean, he did say, I'm not going to cry about it, and albeit he'll be very frustrated. He never made excuses for injuries in my time covering him with Tottenham. I've never heard him make excuses with injuries. He was always very much, it's part of the game. That's why you have a squad. We will find solutions. We will trust people. We'll put faith into people. We're not going to say that we're disadvantaged because the players aren't available, albeit Chelsea clearly are at the moment. So I was a little bit surprised he bit back. I think that was, I suspect, I wasn't there. I covered a different game at the weekend, but I suspect that he was just as frustrated with the questioning of the booing than he was the actual booing. And that maybe him biting back was maybe towards slightly the question as much as it was the act itself. Also, I'd be interested. I was at the Forest game when there was booing as well. I'm not quite sure what the booing's for at the moment. Clearly, it's to show dissatisfaction. But I haven't yet got a handle on, and this might become clear in the next few weeks, whether there's dissatisfaction at Pochettino yet, whether there's dissatisfaction at the team, or whether it's just a wider dissatisfaction, because clearly there's been dissatisfaction around Chelsea for quite a while now because of what happened last season. I haven't quite managed to identify where, usually it becomes fairly clear where the booing's aimed at. I mean, there was definitely booing aimed at Potter last season, for instance. And there's definitely been instances where there's been booing aimed at specific players. Cucurella had it. I haven't quite identified where the booing's at yet, and I think that will become clearer over the course of the next few weeks should results remain bad. But yeah, I don't think Pochettino will be looking for excuses in the injuries. He'll clearly be frustrated. I think what's interesting about Pochettino in terms of how he'll be handling things at the moment, and this is something I know for sure, is certainly in early parts of his reigns and his seasons, and I'm not making excuses for him, I'm really not. He will put far more value in what he sees in performance, in what he sees in numbers, in what he sees in stats. I've covered him before when his teams have been winning and not playing well, and he can be pretty angry around those times. He doesn't put a lot of value in being lucky because he always thinks that will catch up with you. So let's create a scenario now where Chelsea had maybe won 3 and drawn 1 and lost 1 of their first 5 games, but are actually playing really badly and we're getting over the line. People like me in the early part of the season would be saying, that's fine, results are what matter. He would definitely argue the opposite because he thinks that will definitely over time catch up with you and things will turn bad. Whereas he always has a lot of faith in performance and data and that will eventually override results and that results will come off the back of that. So I think he will very much be focusing on that aspect of things while results aren't bad. And I promise you that is not me making excuses for what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I get that too. And it's got to be, unbelievably frustrating. Where I'm kind of hinging myself is we watched him preseason when he had the team fit and they were able, this team has a ton of potential. And right now there's a lot of players being played out of position, forced to play out of position. I think the Enzo playing a 10 is a mistake. Hopefully they revert back to that. But I mean, 12 injuries this early, Nkunku and Chukwuemeka being our number 10 that both went down. It's been a struggle without a doubt. But Conor Gallagher wore the captain's armband, Matt. This is Conor Gallagher that was being shopped around actively. Is this a signal from Poch? Because Raheem Sterling was on the pitch, Enzo Fernandez was on the pitch, Thiago Silva was on the pitch, but Conor wore the captain's armband. That really, I think, surprised a lot of us.
Surprised me. I can't quite get my head around it. I mean, Conor's head must be spinning. I mean, Conor's had a summer where some people at Chelsea have been basically trying to sell him. Some people have wanted to keep him. Some people have told him or indicated that a price is at a certain level. Other people have indicated that a price is at a different level. The manager, I think, has stayed consistent. Pochettino has stayed consistent. He has always seemed to believe that Gallagher can be somebody who can play well within how his system works. And he's clearly been happy with the way he's applied himself through everything. Whether there was a little bit of reward for the way he's dealt with everything in there, whether it was a message to the owners, I can't get my head around it. I thought it was an odd decision, I've got to say, to have your 2 captains out, to have, like you say, Thiago Silva on the pitch, Raheem Sterling on the pitch. I know people talk about Enzo as a future captain, but less so Enzo. I was really surprised by it. And I actually think the captaincy issue at Chelsea, again, feeds into and sums up of the slight chaos around the place where you don't quite know who's making decisions. I'm still surprised it went to Reece James. I'm still surprised that Pochettino was very clear when he announced that it was together with the club, that decision. For me, I'm a traditionalist on that. I don't know why the club would have any input in who the captaincy is. I think that should be a manager decision. I don't really like that. I think that Reece in time will make a very good captain, but I think we've seen already this season that maybe he should just be managing himself and his body at the moment and not be having to think about a dressing room or wider issues. Chile, great guy, very laid-back character. Again, not someone to me who I would have down as a captain. And then we've seen it in games. The armband sort of got passed towards Thiago in some games and he seemed to not want it. Is that because he didn't get given the captaincy and therefore he doesn't want anything to do with it now? Is he sulking a little bit on that? I don't know. This is me speculating. And then for Conor to get the captaincy, the whole thing's just been a bit confusing. And to be honest, everything around Chelsea has been confusing for a long time now. And the captaincy issue just sums it up for me. It's very, very unclear how and why decisions have been made on that captaincy.
Now that you mention it, Chilwell is known for his shenanigans, right? In the canteen, messing with people. You see the clips on social media. that's a great role to have, though, right? Like, he'll always brighten the mood. To your point, is he going to be able to pull a player aside and dress them down a little bit, get them back in line? Because they're looking at him, they're like, it's hard to hear that message from him, but maybe he's going to mature into that because he sees a different role for himself. Yeah,
well, then the other odd, confusing thing about that is we're not quite sure where Chilly's role within the team is at the moment, because obviously he started the season as a sort of makeshift left winger, and then he was dropped out of the starting lineup at the weekend. So again, that feeds into the confusion because he's not. Chilwell himself in his position is not actually settled. So he's a great guy. He's very, very well liked. He's very well liked around, not just among the training ground, but the staff, the people who work at Cobham, the people who work at Stamford Bridge. He's also actually very polite. I can see that in terms of having that role around the club would be good because he's very popular. And like I say, he's very inclusive and very polite. I just don't really have him down as a captain myself. But hey, I'm not there every day. I don't see it. But my wider point on it is I've found the captaincy issue very instructive of the confusion around Chelsea as a whole, because I don't really get any of it, to be quite honest with you.
Well, I mean, I understand it. It shocked a lot of us, as we said, right? Very, very interesting just to see that. And he did well, but when the match is that poor, it's hard to really pick bright spots in those days. So he's continuing with that back fourth. Levi Colwill's left back, which is tough. And that is part of the reason why Chilwell, I think, is being sacrificed a little bit. All right. Well, I mean, otherwise than that, like I said, we were talking and you were saying, like, what else is there to do but to be patient? Is it just the injuries are to the point where, you look at that bench, like, what the only change I could see you doing is bringing in Cole Palmer. Other than that, there's not a lot on the bench to make a direct impact in the team. So it does seem like the worst time to be just surviving match to match, because you look at the fixture list, Matt, like, this was the run that you're like, cool, back to back wins before you get into the mid to late October run where it's just like chainsaw after chainsaw, like grueling match. And we're not maximizing points whatsoever here.
No, but you never know where. It's so difficult to look through fixture lists and know where points are going to come from. We all look at them and we say, well, there's the 3 points, there's the 3 points. And then you sometimes look at a run of games and you say, we are not getting any points in those. I do it as a Villa fan. And yet things don't work out like that. I mean, Chelsea's best performance and best game so far this season has been against Liverpool. Absolutely no doubt about it. They should have won that match, in my opinion, particularly in the second half. And yet that would have been the match out of the entire run of games at the start of the season where you'd have maybe put that one down as a defeat. It's very difficult to second guess the fixtures, but I do take what you're saying. There are points to be had from this fixture list and they've not come. And it does make you worry about what could happen down the line. November, particularly after the next international break, looks very difficult, but they might relish that. They might prefer that. It might suit them a little bit better. You don't know how these things are going to play out at all. I mean, Chelsea lost twice to Southampton last season, didn't they? To what you would call absolute bankers for most clubs. And yet they played okay in some of the bigger games. They drew at home to Liverpool. They played okay away at Liverpool as well, I seem to remember. So, yeah, very difficult to second guess, but I totally agree that these are games you would want to get some points in the bag to take some pressure off. But you're right about the bench. I mean, look, in reality, Chelsea should have forward options of Jackson, who I remain to be convinced whether he's a goal scorer. It's early days for him. But they should have Jackson and Kunku, who you'd imagine would be somewhere on the pitch. You should have a Brozier in and around the squad, either on the bench or playing as an option. And then you'd have, forward options such as Madueke, Carney, whether Sterling's on the pitch, off the pitch, Sterling. And yet, because of the amount of injuries, that Bournemouth game, you looked at the bench and there was nothing there. I mean, the kid Washington, they were thinking about loaning him out on the last day of the transfer window. I think the way the juggle happened, I don't think he'd have necessarily been part of the squad. I think down the line, he might not spend an awful lot of time on the substitutes bench. He hasn't played a lot of senior football. They can't rely on him. There was just, attacking-wise, there was nothing there for them to call on. You're dead right. There was Cole Palmer, but past him, there was really nothing there to call on. And they've got to get some options back fairly quickly, because you just didn't see any goals in it at all at the weekend.
Nothing like 3 left-footed players, 2 traditional left backs, and a right wing to come off your bench and change the game when you need 3 points. So, but we're going to take our first break. When we get back, want to talk about what a lot of the Chelsea legend match has changed the perspective, I think, of a lot of fans. So, thank you to the sponsors, and we'll be right back. A lot of people, I'm sure you've seen this, Matt, are talking about the Chelsea legends that just played at the Bayern Munich legends at Stamford Bridge, and they could do better than the team. But I think what it's hearkening back to, and we talked, is about what Chelsea used to be. But the thing is, Chelsea have a new ownership group. They clearly had a different strategy this summer. To your point, you called out earlier, no international starters. We've kind of hit the reset, and your coworker, Sam Wallace, had the big kind of breakdown piece of the break about Chelsea and the club. And so I think that there's a lot of nostalgia and like pro Abramovich sentiment. We even saw Marina make an appearance at the bridge, right? All of a sudden, like there's a little bit of dust being kicked up of, what used to be. But here we are. It's different. It's a very different club. And Sam actually did a great job of kind of breaking down all these different pieces of the club. And I understand why Drogba says, I don't recognize this club anymore. It hurts to hear that as a fan for obvious reasons, but there is a bit of a reset happening, it seems like.
There's a massive reset already happened. He's right. To be honest, I don't recognize the club. I find it's almost a reset moment to cover the club. Obviously, I went through the takeover process and was quite close to that. But just in terms of trying to get your head around what this club now are, it's a reset process from that. All the staff are completely different. It is like literally walking into a different club. If it wasn't for the fact it was at Stamford Bridge still and all the Chelsea branding was still there, it literally would be like covering a completely different club. Almost nothing has remained as what was there before. And I can well imagine that fans still find that very, very difficult. And that is a challenge for managers as well. Potter used to talk about it. And I think Pochettino will find that it's all right talking about creating a new culture, but trying to change a culture within a fan base of what they've been used to for so long is really difficult. And that's not to criticise the fans at all, because I would find it very difficult as a fan as well. Sam's piece was very interesting. It talks about the fact that they've got this 100-point team as the end goal. That's what they're trying to build. Sam's wasn't an opinion piece. Sam wasn't trying to say that's right or wrong. He was doing it on information and insight that he'd been given. God, looking at it now, how long would it take Chelsea have never had a 100-point team. So it's a hell of an ambition. Some might call it quite an arrogant ambition, because Chelsea have had incredible teams under Mourinho, under Conte, under Ancelotti, and they've never got to 100 points. So, it's obviously built on looking at Man City and looking at what it took for Liverpool to win a league. But they're so far off 100 points. And you just wonder how achievable that is, and B, how long that would take to actually get to. But it's a really interesting ambition, and it clearly speaks to why they've gone so young, because to build a 100-point team from scratch, in terms of an immediate 100-point team would be almost impossible with the amount of money you would actually have to spend. You would have to sign Harry Kane, you'd have to sign all kinds of ready-made players. So they're trying to build a 100-point team through potential. And it's clearly a massive risk, and it clearly comes with a risk attached to it. And I saw somebody reply to one of the tweets on the 100-point team saying, are they looking to build that 100-point team over the length of an 8-year? Is that amortized over the length of an 8-year contract? But it might take that long. It might, because it's a hell of an ambition. I found that I hadn't heard that, personally before, that the 100-point team was the sort of end goal, and that's what they believe will take them to where they want to go. But yeah, let's see how that develops. I'd struggle to see the current team being much at its very best, much past a 70-point team. at the moment, and that would be really top. They'd have to improve a lot on what they are at the moment to achieve that. But there's a long way to go before they get to that aim.
Very true. Obviously, most listeners heard our preseason predictions of points, right, and where we had us, and I don't think too many people are taking a lot over 70 in that sense. And the Premier League maybe is more competitive or it's regressed. I really can't tell. But either way, there's more points being taken off teams, whereas there was very much kind of a water line that everyone just fought for, 6 on below. Those middle of the table, top 10 positions are tougher to come by these days. So, maybe you even need to hedge. Like the 100 days are over, but it's the project they're on. I'm a little worried about the Moneyball approach to it. But Sam, like you said, did a great job. He's also kind of talking about what the owners are doing in terms of trying to buddy up with people around Europe, right? And like when they go to the European Club Association and what they're trying to do within the Premier League and build relationships as well to make sure that, I don't know, like Chelsea can get business done better if they can create some strategic alliances. I guess, like, how do you interpret what Sam put out there in this regard?
I think it's really interesting. I think it's interesting that looks like the role that Todd Boehly is going to be more moved towards. He's going to be a lot of these sort of European Club Association meetings. He's going to be the one with the relationships, with the other directors and the other owners a little bit more than maybe Badad Eghbali. He's going to be more sort of around the ambassadorial stuff, a lot around where a traditional chairman actually, he still holds the title of chairman, and a lot around where a traditional chairman would be. Bruce Butt would have done a lot of that before, and it feels like Todd is kind of moving more in that direction than he is the sort of sporting direction of the club. I think Todd as well will be far more involved around, like you say, like the multi-club stuff, developing relationships around the multi-club around. I think the Todd side is more involved in the stadium and things like that, whereas the Clearlake and the Badad side seem to have taken more of a front foot on the sporting decisions and the decisions around transfers and sporting hires. I think, again, Todd will be more involved in the broadcast stuff because that's where his strength lies. But yeah, it seems to be breaking down like that, which is kind of interesting, that maybe Todd will take on a bit more of a traditional chairman role than sort of the co-owner role as it's been up till now. And look, that he's looking for areas of growth. It's quite clear. Let's forget about where Chelsea are now in terms of the league table and the difficulties they're facing on the pitch. They are looking big time at growth. They've got some big ticket projects. We've got quite a big week this week in that the consultation period on their winning bid for the Stoll site next to Stamford Bridge. We're talking on Tuesday. The consultation period ends Wednesday. Chelsea should have some conclusion on that within the next month over actually formally acquiring that land. There's been a little bit of sort of disharmony around some people involved in it over whether it should go through, but I think it will go through. So that then accelerates the decisions that need to be made over the stadium. I'm told they're still analysing hard on whether to go full tilt for the redevelopment on Stamford Bridge or leave it open, still on looking at that other site. But I think Stoll decisions should help that. I think they want to redevelop. They want to start a redevelopment. Well, they've already actually started a redevelopment program at Cobham, but they want to increase that and get to grips with that a bit more. And they clearly want to carry on down the multi-club route model. Portugal is their big area of interest at the moment. But these are 3 really big ticket areas of growth they're looking at. They're also looking very hard at what can be maximised through broadcast. We have a situation this weekend where Chelsea are playing at 2 p.m. on a Sunday against Aston Villa. Forget the fact I'm a Villa fan. It's a very attractive fixture. Villa have been good in recently over the last sort of 12 months or a bit less. It's considered quite an important game in that, Chelsea really need to win it. It should be a good competitive game. It's not on anywhere in England. The broadcaster's not showing it, which, is staggering. And Boehly and other owners will be looking at that saying, what is going on? Why have we got big matches like this that aren't available on TV that are being played at 2 p.m. on a Sunday? And they will be looking at all those areas of growth at the moment. That's a huge thing that Bowley and the club are involved in. And something that's just going to become a bigger and bigger priority, no matter what happens actually on the pitch in the short term. That is not going to impact their long-term growth proposals at all.
There's a lot there, right? Is to your point. Like, how much was the Stoll ground going for again? Like tens of millions.
80 million. 80 million. 80 million is the number that Chelsea have got preferred bidder status with.
And wait, I'm looking at the aerial shot now. Like, it definitely opens some things up. The stadium is still massively squeezed in. So, just to confirm on the stadium, is it Stoll ground for current site location or Earl's Court, or is there some kind of combination where Earl's Court is the temporary? Because that would be another how many 100 million as well?
Look, I think to try and break it down a little bit. So the Stoll site is very, very interesting to Chelsea, no matter what they do. Let's put it that way, because what they can do with that site, no matter what, is house a lot of officing on that site, which currently is within the sort of Stamford Bridge Stadium confines, which gives major restrictions around there. But even were they to move away, they could still have a lot of officing around the Stoll site and a lot of stuff around the Stoll site, obviously, that would be near the site of the old ground that they could still use for stuff, and that would still open up a new site predominantly just for like football stadium, as it were. So that Stoll site opens up a host of opportunities, whether they stay at Stamford Bridge or whether they leave Stamford Bridge. But were they not to acquire the Stoll site, I think it would be very hard for them to prioritise staying at Stamford Bridge, just because I don't think they would have the space they felt they needed to do what they could. So the Stoll site has been absolutely crucial in keeping the Stamford Bridge, staying at Stamford Bridge alive, really, realistically, I think. I know it would have to go through the CPO, and I know that there is a scenario where they'd have to stay at Stamford Bridge no matter what. I get that. But in terms of what they want to do, keeping Stamford Bridge as an option that they are prepared to really realistically invest in, Stoll is massive for them, because they can not only house offices in that area, they can also use it to open out a huge entrance into Stamford Bridge with, were they to redevelop the stadium, you might find that the sort of main reception entrance area and sort of what will constitute a new fan zone would all be within that open area. And then it would allow what we call Stamford Bridge now to be purely stadium, with no sort of officing within it, with no sort of necessarily even club shop where it is now. And it would open up a lot of space. It doesn't solve everything by any means. There's still a lot of problems associated to actually redeveloping Stamford Bridge into what they would. And like I say, some might look at it and think, well, why on earth would you buy Stoll if you were going to think about moving still? Well, as I say, Stoll still offers them a lot of opportunities, that site, even if they move away, because they'd still end up doing something around Stamford Bridge and having, like I say, some sort of offices and all kinds like that around Stamford Bridge.
Yeah. Again, like if they could somehow buy up the property between them and Fulham Broadway, that would open up to and give them the ability to do it. But for American fans, it is not that simple, right? In the U.S., the leverage is with the teams, not in the U.K. It is quite the opposite as far as getting planning permissions and things like that. So, interesting. We'll keep
I mean, if you want to look at, if you want to try and look at a good example of what they'd be looking to do around the Stoll, away from offices, is look at the lady who helped them with the Dodgers is involved in the whole stadium project. It's really bad of me. I can't remember her name off the top of my head. I've written her name in plenty of articles, but there's a lady who is very much involved in the Dodgers one, who's involved in now the Stamford Bridge project. And she was very much in charge of creating the sort of fan zone and fan experience area at the front of the Dodgers stadium.
Janet Marie Smith.
Yes. So if you look at what she did at the front of the Dodgers stadium, where there's a fan experience with eating and stuff going on, I think you have to imagine that were they to redevelop Stamford Bridge, that's what she would be looking to do within some of the area that would be opened out by Stoll.
Yep. So to tie that down, Dodger Stadium rebuild, Boston's Fenway Park, and Atlanta Centennial Olympic Stadium to help with the U.S. audience. So interesting. Well, let's take our last break, but there's actually a lot more of this article that we're going to continue to cover, including contracts and what the future kind of holds for this team. So thank you to the sponsors. We'll be right back. All right. Again, you rattled off a lot of things in the ambition, and we're talking $2.5 billion to buy the club, $1 billion plus for the stadium. They've spent $1 billion on players. There's one thing you can't say that this group is, and it's committed. They are it's kind of hard to comprehend how fast some of these things are going and just how much cash is being injected into the club. Again, I think that there's concerns or, rich people problems of complaining that maybe the right players weren't spent or, heaven forbid, we're complaining about $115 million Casado. That's, again, lavish problems that we're trying to kind of manufacture because the results are there. One thing before we get into the Sporting Lisbon discussion is just the long-term contract strategy that Sam laid out here. I'm almost more surprised at how upset or painful the owners found Rudiger Christensen walking was than anything.
I think that just blew their minds. And it's clearly really been something that's impacted on them a lot, and probably too much, to be honest with you, by judging by Sam's piece, because I don't think they should have been impacted by it quite as much as they were. But it's clearly they've come in and that's happened, and they've seen what's happened, and it's clearly absolutely blown their minds that they've got in that situation. Now, you would be able to talk to me better than I would know about how would it relate to US sport? Why would it blow their minds so much? Can you not have talent walking away for free in US sport? Does that not happen? Because I can only think that they look at US sport and just think this couldn't happen in US sport.
I think the teams have a lot more leverage. There's not a big advantage because there's not these transfer fees in US sports.
Yeah.
So you either trade for players, or if you let a contract run down, it's because you don't want that player anymore and you're releasing them. So yeah. I think the fact that there was a player with value that's just able to walk away and sign whatever they want, and we call that in the U.S. free agency. Some players explore, but it's not like this. And again, there's none of these transfer fees. So if you want a free agency, LeBron might leave the Lakers and he might go right back to them. It just frees him up to negotiate with all these other teams. Okay. And there's that situation. So yeah. Yeah.
But it's obviously killed them in terms of killed their mindset that two players who could probably fetch, I don't know, what would Rudiger have been maybe worth at the time he went? He wasn't on his best season, but he also had come up a lot. He's probably at least a £50 million player, I'd guess, 40, £50 million player at his age. Obviously some injury issues in there as well. Christensen, because of the potential that he holds, probably again, £40 million player. So they probably look at it and think these are two guys who may be worth together about £100 million, and they've walked away for free. That's obviously absolutely blown their minds, and they've set an entire philosophy around it, which I maintain I think is an overreaction, and I don't think that you should set an entire philosophy around it. But I get that they want to protect themselves and they don't want to be caught out like that again. And what they obviously found was, aside from Christensen and Rudiger, was when they came in, there were a lot of players who were heading towards this situation as well, and it clearly panicked them. I think they've gone too far the other way, because now they almost have a philosophy whereby once a player gets to 2 years, it's renew or sell, or it's try and renew or sell. And obviously players within that, it's we'll listen to anything for, hence they accepted a bid on Ian Maatsen on the final day of the transfer window and he didn't go. I think they've overreacted to that, but I get it. I do get it. But it has impacted an entire contract philosophy, it would seem, with the long-term contract philosophies, which has been explained in that, to them, a 5-year contract is basically a 3-year contract. An 8-year contract is basically a 6-year contract, because, like I say, what they have decided they do is they now make a decision with 2 years to go.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a lot of it too, right? So the
But
8 year
I've heard this before. I cover Tottenham as well. Tottenham went through a period where they said this. Tottenham went through a period saying we are never going to let a player get within 2 years of his contract. But they found it didn't work
yeah.
because they just didn't want to sell when push came to shove. They didn't want to sell their best players just because they were going to enter the last 2 years of their contract. So it didn't actually work for them. It was great theory, but they had to ditch it. And I think in time, although these contracts are so long, it'll be a while till we get to here. Chelsea will find that if their best players get to 2 years and they're on the cusp of winning things or they are competing for things, in reality, they'll find they can't really actually sell them and that they will have to take the risk of going into those 2 years. That you can't stick to that in reality. It has to be fluid.
For sure. It's definitely not black and white on these things. And more players seem to be comfortable with running down their contracts. It used to be they want the long contracts to essentially guarantee income. There's been a trend lately. A lot of players have taken the free, or the Bosman has become known.
This is it. I mean, it's going. You're dead right. It's actually going against the trend as well, because players more and more want the power for themselves. And what you'll also find now is because players are increasingly looked after by their families rather than an outside agent, their families would rather they stick through a full contract and then they try and take the payday at the end of the contract because the money stays within the family. Whereas players can move between agents are actually more inclined to go for the quick contracts or the quick moves because they're constantly trying to keep the money going, because they don't know whether they will lose these clients. But if a family is looking after a player, they're never really going to lose the client. And they will then be more inclined to run down the contract right till the very end and either take it with 1 year to go or actually take it with the full year to go. So it does also go against the trend of the way certainly players and families are looking at their contracts these days.
Yeah. And again, good shout out here that they're saying, look, if you're on a 5-year deal, to your point, you got to make a decision within the 2-year period. It's only 3 years. They're trying to kick out the negotiation process having to happen so frequently. They just felt like it was nonstop contract negotiations, and they're trying to extend that out. I can't remember if it was this one, and I'm trying to scan quick, or is it a different one where they're talking about there's also a thought that picking up players on a free actually maybe aren't cheaper because the inflated wages, the inflated agent fees and things like that either.
Yeah, I mean, their point was not only actually where the free transfers, but also even sometimes players on clauses. I think Erling Haaland was used as an example because obviously Erling Haaland, I think his clause was about 50 million, but the true cost of that deal is probably 200 million, something like that. So what they were saying is sometimes these deals that look like great deals on the face of them, the associated costs make them not great deals. Again, I'm not so sure about that. I still think a good free transfer is a good free transfer, even if you're paying an agent's fee and the wages are topped up. And look, clauses can be very, very useful for buying players. So I think maybe they were trying to use that maybe to help make their points of why their philosophy is good. I get that the theory behind some of it, but again, I think it's fluid. A good free transfer is a good free transfer. There are expensive, bad free transfers out there as well. It's like anything, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, exactly. And Haaland was the example here, and it was this article, so that's good.
And Haaland was well worth the money. This is.
I'd say Lewandowski would have been a hell of a free transfer.
Exactly, and some of the deals that you look at sometimes when you look at deals, they can look so expensive. I remember when Rio Ferdinand went to Manchester United. I think it was for 50 million at the time, and the wages were huge. And you looked at it and just thought, that is such an astronomical deal. And yet he more than paid them back. He was a top-class player, a top-class defender for them for a very long time. It ended up being well worth the money. Sometimes the massive deals, if you get the massive deals right, and this is where I would argue on Caicedo and Enzo, if you get the massive deals right, they end up looking good value in the long term, but you've got to get them right.
Yeah, no one's picking up an Eden Hazard for 30 million anymore. Like, that is gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Sporting Lisbon are the next name kind of on the Blue Co. strategy here. Obviously, we got Ligue 1 club Strasbourg, who I will continue to say with an American emphasis because I cannot pronounce it in the French dialect. Heads up, everybody. Nick is actually recording another podcast with JJ about Strasbourg right now, so we will have an update this week. But Matt, the multi-club model is banging. Are you surprised that there's not more progress made here? Or does this seem reasonable because there is a lot of capital that is being allocated to get into these clubs? But Sporting, it would be a minority stake is my understanding. You definitely get a top club, European, a lot of history, winning the Portuguese Premier League many, many, many times. What do you know, like what's the upside to take a minority stake in a bigger club versus just buying a smaller club?
Well, that is a really interesting question. I think obviously the upside in getting some sort of investment into Sporting would basically be the sort of first refusal option, quite frankly, in terms of players trading between both clubs, being able to use both clubs as a loan. The Sporting upside of having that first refusal with a club like Sporting Lisbon would be huge, to be quite honest with you, in terms of being able to take South American players in there to get big. I mean, because it's big club experience, it will come with pressure. That's what you would get. With a lot of these multi-clubs, you can get players first team experience, but a lot of them don't play with massive pressure because the clubs tend to be smaller clubs within their divisions where the expectation is not there to win every single week. Obviously, European experience as well, stuff like that. It would, on a Sporting side, it would almost be unprecedented. I was trying to think whether I can think of a comparable example of a club in the modern day having a sort of tie-up with a club as big as Sporting Lisbon. And it's really difficult to think of. I think it would be quite groundbreaking the way. I don't like it because I think that Sporting Lisbon is a club with a massive tradition of its own. And to think of them, even on a minority investment scale, going into some sort of multi-club model, I would just find that, again, I often talk about the fact I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I would find that slightly unpalatable. I wouldn't like that for European football, because to me, Sporting Lisbon are a huge, huge club. But it would be very exciting for Chelsea and for the owners and I think it would be quite groundbreaking to have that alliance with a club with the history and as big as Sporting Lisbon, be it with players, with managers, with coaching staff, with staff around the scenes. It would offer them huge opportunities. And look, I can see, taking the emotion out of it and the romanticism from my point of view, I can fully see why it's very attractive for them to explore. And I've got to say, it's incredibly ambitious to look at a club like that for potential multi-club ownership. But it would have to, I think within the rules, it would have to be some sort of minority style. I don't think you could get it through the rules of the, particularly with their European, Sporting Lisbon are always going to probably be in some sort of European competition. I think it would be very difficult to get by the rules of anything more than a minority investment. But yeah, very, very ambitious.
Well, I mean, a lot of the multi-club model is really coming down to financial flexibility, right? There is like development pathways for sure, but what City are able to do is skirt a lot of financial regulations and things. Like Aaron Moy is my favorite example, right?
Yeah.
Played in their Australian club, came to City on a free, never played, never put on the shirt, immediately sold to, I think it was Brighton at the time. And it was an immediate injection of like 30 million, right? Like came essentially from Australia to Brighton through City, plus 30 million on the balance sheet. And that's what they were able to do with a lot of different players. And then this is what Sam really drives home and is like, look, Abramovich was able to sell players. We had the loan army. There's a lot of things able to do. Times have changed. And they're saying that even City Football Group have shown that you can do it at an even bigger scale with this multi-club model. So that's why I'm always interested in like buying small clubs where you have complete control versus this actually kind of caught me off guard in the sense of, to your point, competitive, pressure, top club in Europe. I'm just waiting to kind of understand how that might work because you have less control and less ability to impact things.
You do, but I mean, I suppose. Look, let's try and take an example. Let's say David Datro Fofana, who is on loan at Union Berlin, I think, who play Real Madrid in the Champions League this week as well. So that's a hell of an opportunity for him. He still hasn't scored for them, by the way. But let's take him as an example. Were he to go to Strasbourg and score 20 goals, let's say, and Chelsea had full control of it or very big control of it, whereby he plays every single week and he scores 20 goals. He comes back to Chelsea. They still don't think he's quite good enough for Chelsea. They signed him for 11 million. If he scores 20 goals in Ligue 1 at Strasbourg, you're definitely looking at sort of 25 million. Were David Datro Fofana to go to Sporting Lisbon on loan, much bigger gamble, because much bigger chance of him not playing. But were he to score 15 goals at Sporting Lisbon, you're probably almost certainly looking at 30 million plus for David Datro Fofana then if you came back and you didn't want him. So again, the risk and reward is probably greater with having someone like a Sporting Lisbon within there, that you'd have to take a risk in terms of sending players there to play because they might not play and therefore it might not serve its purpose. But were they to play and perform and you decide they're not quite what you want for your team, crikey, the value. Players in the Portuguese league, we see how much Benfica managed to sell their players for, Enzo being a great case in point. The value that would put on them would be absolutely enormous. If Datro Fofana this season does get going with the goals and scores 15 goals for Union Berlin, and he came back to Chelsea and they wanted to sell him, they bought him for 11 million. You might get 15 million for him then, I would say, something like that. So yeah, it's looking at risk and reward. It's really interesting, but it's a great point. It is a great way of, City have been phenomenal at it recently. There was the left back as well, wasn't it? Was it Angelino, the left back, who was on loan somewhere, did very well. He went for a good fee, almost came back to City. Did he go to Leipzig? I think he went to Leipzig in the end. There's a lot of cases. Douglas Luiz at Villa, absolutely fantastic example. Douglas Luiz at Villa, he went off to a Spanish club, played for a year. Villa bought him for about 15 million with him never having played in England. City actually retained a buyback on him for a year. They could have bought him off Villa after 1 year for 30 million. They didn't bother doing that, but they made 15 million on him, never played in England. I'd actually argue he's probably now a 40 million pound player, actually. But he's a great example of how that system worked for them. They made 15 million pounds on a guy who'd never played in England.
Yeah, I'm expecting a couple more, but again, just the ability to do these deals, ton of cash. Like, this isn't simple, right? And to make sure the structure's right is the most important part. So we'll have to see. What do you think, Matt? I've got a kit that I ordered that's supposed to arrive at the end of September. Think it's going to have a sponsor on it?
It's a good question. I knew you were going to get me with that. I woke up this morning and thought I should put in a call to making a check on Infinite Athlete, and things have got away from me and I haven't made that check. I will promise you that on the next show, if the sponsor is not there, I will, a day beforehand, get you a proper exclusive sponsor update for you. That's all I can promise you.
If there is, would you go to the Mega Store and buy me a blank kit just so I could have that? Would you ever find yourself in the Mega Store, Matt, buying a Chelsea kit? I'll wire you the funds.
Yeah, I would. I'd be a little bit scared of someone deciding to have some fun on social media with that, were they to. I'd go in with a big coat and my hood up or something like that. It's not like I'm not some sort of celebrity who needs to worry about get recognised, but just on the off chance there was one person in the hundreds of people in there who might recognise me, I'd just not want to get too much fun on social media with that.
Funny. Yeah, we'll wait and see what happens. It's just kind of fine. I don't think anyone's too bothered, but the last thing in Sam's piece was talking about maximizing all parts of the club, and commercial value is one of them. And it seems like the one that hasn't clicked really at all. Kudos for getting the app updated. Like, I actually appreciate that. They've got some integrations and things, but from a commercial value standpoint, Trivago's got to be thrilled because they get all the spotlight because they're the only one around right now.
Amazing, isn't it? Amazing. I'm, yeah, given look, I do think it's one thing to give them some stick over is the sponsorship, because I can forgive them mistakes within football because they've come into football cold. They've got to learn on their feet. I think they're going to learn. It's clear they're going to learn by their mistakes. I've said before, it might take them a little while. I still think they'll get there football-wise. They're willing to spend enough money. They're willing to hire enough people. I think in time they will get there football-wise. These guys were meant to be brilliant at attracting sponsors and commercial end, and they talked a lot about it when they came in. They should have a sponsor by now. It's a big black mark next to their name. Sorry to them for saying it, but that is a failure on their part. Kit looks great, and I really like the third kit, actually. Kit looks great, no problem with that. If I was a Chelsea fan, I'd be buying it with a blank thing and certainly never updating it with the sponsor. But look, it's a failure. They should have a sponsor on by now.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, all right, well, I won't push you. I think that there's many other people out there that would get that kit for me and ship it through the Royal Mail over. I wouldn't.
Loads of contacts. You can get way better people than me to get you that kit, and I'm sure you've got contacts who won't even make you pay for it.
I was just testing our friendship, so I appreciate that, because we've got the Matt Law London is Blue Derby coming up, don't we?
Yeah, if you want to call it that, that's fine. I will be there covering it, and I tend to manage to sort of switch off from my allegiances during the game, and then should we get a result, I'll enjoy it when I watch it back when I get home. But yeah.
Are you your team's going to Poland ahead of that, aren't they?
Poland on Thursday. Do you know what? I think actually Chelsea are playing Villa at a very good time. It's been 14 years since Villa have had to try and combine European football with league football, and they are not used to it at all. So I think you're playing us at a very good time, because I do think it's going to take Villa a little while to get used to that. And I think we're going to suffer some defeats on the back of Thursday nights for a little while until we do get used to that. So look, Chelsea are in a bad spot with injuries. I get that. But I think they're facing Villa at a good time this weekend.
Yeah, look, anything that we can do to stack the deck in our favor. I think Villa is West Ham, right? They've got to manage both. West Ham struggled in the league, did really well, though, in the Conference League, and won it. And so they seem to have bounced back this season. It is a tough thing. We've seen a lot of teams, even Leicester City, when they won the Premier League in the magical fashion, struggling to take on the Champions League. By the way, you imagine that in hindsight. Now we look back to that, like Leicester City won the Premier League and then got dropped into the Champions League the next season. And like Wes Morgan and Jamie Vardy were leading the back line and the front line. Wild times in hindsight.
They did a decent job of it as well.
Yeah.
They coped quite well. They coped better with the Champions League than they coped with the Conference League. They had a really bad. They didn't go down the season in the Conference League, but they struggled with the Conference League too. I think Villa will find it tough combining the both. I'm just here for the ride. I'm just going to enjoy it.
Hey, Unai knows what to do. He's a big, Europa League success with Sevilla and things like that. So that's a leg up. But anyways, I think that'll wrap us up, Matt. Lots going on. Appreciate your time as always. But Chelsea fans, a lot of content coming your way. So until next time, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.